Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet of ours. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear. This is the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society, and I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining the conversation today. Fire season is coming, and we're going to dig into how new technology may catch and contain fires in the first few minutes after ignition. There's a saying among firefighters: you can fight fire in the first second with a spoonful of water, in the first minute with a bucketful of water, and in the first hour with a truckload of water. The problem is that by the time most wildfires are detected, minutes have already passed, and in those minutes, under increasingly common conditions, a fire can grow beyond any tanker truck's capacity. On January 7th, 2025, hurricane-force Santa Ana winds drove flames through Pacific Palisades and Altadena in Los Angeles, and in a matter of hours, more than 16,000 structures were destroyed, 30 people were killed, and 180,000 residents were forced to flee. The total economic losses are estimated to be between $76 billion and $131 billion from a single fire event, and that was just 1 week in one city. In 2025, the U.S. recorded more than 61,500 wildfires that burned nearly 5 million acres, leading to annual U.S. wildfire costs of between $394 billion and $893 billion when you factor in the cost of healthcare, lost productivity, ecosystem damage, and the expensive task of rebuilding entire cities. So there's an identifiable gap in the current best practices, which take roughly 40 minutes from ignition to deliver a coordinated response. What if you could cut that to 10 minutes, when only a few buckets of water could extinguish a threat? And what if autonomous systems, such as AI-enabled drones and ground-based sensor networks, could detect a fire, distinguish it from a prescribed burn, and suppress it before getting a human on the radio? That's the challenge behind the XPRIZE Wildfire program, an $11 million global competition now entering its final year. And our guest today is Andrea Santi, the program director leading it. Andrea came to the XPRIZE after nearly 2 decades at the World Wildlife Fund, and she also spent time before that at the Smithsonian Institution, leading conservation and academic programs. On January 29th, just after the 1-year anniversary of those LA fires I was talking about, XPRIZE announced the 5 finalist teams that are advancing in the autonomous wildfire response track of the competition. They include Anduril, a defense technology company deploying a Lattice AI platform with autonomous fire sentry towers and Ghost X drones that are watching for fires at the moment they break out. Dryad, a German company running solar-powered sensor networks that detect fires at the smoldering stage. Fireswarm Solutions, a Canadian team coordinating heavy-lift drone swarms that can carry 100 gallons of water autonomously to the point where a fire begins. Data Blanket, building a rapidly deployable drone swarm system for real-time perimeter mapping and suppression of wildfire. And finally, Wildfire Quest, a team of high school students from Valley Christian High School in San Jose who partnered with 2 aerospace companies to use multi-sensor triangulation to locate fires when they cannot be seen from monitoring locations. After all, a lot of fires happen just over the hill. A separate track of the competition, the Space-Based Wildfire Detection and Intelligence Program, includes 10 finalists from 6 countries who are heading to Australia in April for their own finals. Those teams will have 1 minute to detect all fires across an area larger than a state and 10 minutes to deliver precise reports to firefighting decision makers on the ground. And so we're going to talk with Andrea about what the finalists demonstrated during live trials, why the decoy fire requirement is one of the hardest AI classification problems in the competition, and how these autonomous systems would actually integrate with existing wildfire incident command structures. We'll also dig into the tension between suppression technology and the growing scientific consensus that many landscapes need more fire, not less, and whether indigenous fire stewardship practices have a place in this conversation. You can learn more about XPRIZE Wildfire at xprize.org/competitions/wildfire. Again, that's xprize.org/competitions/wildfire. Can autonomous drones and AI-driven sensor networks actually detect and suppress a wildfire in less than 10 minutes? Let's find out right after this brief commercial break. Welcome to the show, Andrea. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me. We've had XPRIZE leaders on the show a number of times, and you guys do such interesting work. You announced the finalists just 1 year after the catastrophe in LA. How did that reshape the urgency and the direction for the XPRIZE wildfire competition?
Um, it, it it definitely focuses a more intense light on the competition and the need for these solutions. Climate change is driving more intense, more frequent wildfires all around the world. And so I think that the urgency was already there. But when you have a disaster at the scale and scope of the LA fires, it absolutely changes the way that everybody thinks about wildfires.
What's the realistic timeline for these technologies in the competition to potentially start changing the way that we fight fire and the outcomes of those fires?
So I'll start by saying we were in LA when the
Mhm.
fires started. So, XPRIZE has a lot of LA based staff, and we're originally LA based, and we were having our staff meeting. So our entire staff was there. We knew from our prize, we knew that it was going to be very high risk.
Mhm.
And so we were in touch with fire chiefs as the fires were starting. And we were able to go out and see the fire, like where the fires had gone through the Palisades and part of the city, basically 24 hours after it had happened. So it really, I will just say, like, really, definitely, there's a huge impact in terms of being able to see that just a landscape and communities and homes and schools and businesses that have been devastated. Um, a lot of the technology that is being integrated with these solutions is technology that can be deployed really almost immediately. I think that as the fire agencies begin to get their hands on more of the technology, I think we're going to have a hopefully relatively quick uptake. But cameras, sensors, improved satellite data, a lot of this is stuff that is already being deployed. And so we're looking at, really the how quick and under what conditions can it help improve our detection. And then we have other components that I would say are going to have a longer timeline to being able to be deployed.
Well, it sounds like part of the problem then is just hooking all this together, but does that also apply to areas outside of major cities? Do you think we have the resources to do this on a nationwide basis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are doing our testing for our space-based competition in Australia. And so
Mhm.
we're looking at how do you detect fires over vast areas from satellites as quickly as possible and delivering that information down within 10 minutes with 15-minute updates. For our autonomous track, we're testing in Alaska.
Mhm.
So it will definitely be a real world scenario where you'll be able to understand the capabilities of the technologies in forested areas, in really vast terrain, and different environmental conditions. And so part of why, we're working with these partners because they're great partners to be able to work with, but it also really allows us to validate this technology under real world and challenging conditions.
So how does the wildfire strategy change when this technology is in place? As you've already mentioned, the climate crisis is accelerating the size and pace of these fires. Is it to suppress more fires earlier so that those resources that are available can be deployed to those that actually break out? What's the big picture change in policy here?
Yeah, so XPRIZE really decided to double down on early detection and then autonomous response. So we do have these two tracks. So I'm going to talk about the detection piece first
Mhm.
because I think that it's just super digestible for everyone. So every wildfire starts small.
Mhm.
Wildfires don't start as a huge catastrophe. They start small. They often start in pretty remote areas. Sometimes they burn really fast. Sometimes they burn slower, depending on the conditions. But if you can address a wildfire at its very smallest phase, kind of just immediately, even you could say post ignition, but even when it's just starting to, burn,
Hmm.
that gives you the best chance to be able to address it, either through one component is these autonomous systems that can suppress or through your fire service. And so if you have more eyes, we'll use our technology as our eyes and ears and noses on the landscape, the better your chance of being able to get that alert as soon as possible. And then that allows the fire service to decide how they are going to prioritize their resources. The other component which we're advancing is this idea of autonomous detection and response. So the, sensors, the cameras can do the detection. The autonomous response, we're testing out drones. We have, systems, these drones that are able to, from the alert that they get from the sensors or the cameras or, whichever detection component, to be able to deploy, verify that there is a fire. So, it's not a barbecue, but this is actually a fire that needs to be suppressed and place suppressant fully autonomously. And that is what we're going to be testing in Alaska is to say, okay, can they do this full end-to-end system? Are there, is their technology integrated? Will it be able to reach the scale and scope of the challenge and the geography? Because 1,000 square kilometers, which is what we're testing under, is about the size of San Antonio, Texas. So a huge area. And then the teams will have to find multiple fires. And so we're also looking at their capability to have this persistent monitoring and persistent response. And, imagine you're in a place where you have, ravines or you have a fire that's starting. If you can get this, something out there in minutes, your chance of
Hmm.
being able to knock it down, even just deter that, suppress the fire enough so that the firefighters can get there, it's going to, we hope be a game changer.
We're talking about autonomous drones, but one of the things that happened in the LA wildfire was that Santa Ana winds were so extreme, our fixed wing aircraft couldn't fly. Can a drone perform in those conditions?
So during our semifinal testing, our team traveled the world to be able to observe these solutions in action. While not at scale, each of the five finalists were able to demonstrate that they could detect a fire, navigate to a fire, and suppress a fire fully autonomously over a small area. Coincidentally, relatively strong winds followed us. So nothing
Hmm.
like the Santa Ana winds, but we had 40-mile-per-hour winds pretty consistently during testing. It was very odd, but it was helpful for us in terms of being able to validate that technology. The teams, because you don't have a human pilot, your ability, it's not that the helicopters can't fly, it's that the helicopters and the planes, they can't fly in that type of wind and put a human at risk. So
Hmm.
this takes at least that human element out of it. It is going to continue to be a challenge, but many of the drones have a relatively high wind tolerance. And the systems, as technology gets better, the systems themselves, they're providing the inputs so that they stay balanced.
And so it's also being combined with sensor networks in various places. Can you talk a little about how that's being deployed?
Yeah, so some of the teams have an approach where, they're really looking at how do you do this ultra early detection by having a sensor network that is you know, really kind of like many, many sensors in an area that are all connected through your mesh network, allows for something small that can be placed in a lot of different areas, which gives you really great coverage. And so that's going to be, all of the different teams are going to be competing under the same scenario. So we'll get to see, which I'm really excited about, kind of like which technologies work under which conditions.
Hmm.
There's no one silver bullet that's going to work in every single condition and in every single geography and in every single forest type. And so I think that it will be helpful for us to do this level set, but working on a pilot phase post competition so that we can continue to have these teams test and deploy the technology so that we can gain even better understandings. It's really
But
important to improve trust and like build trust so that the fire agencies know what the technology can do under, critical situations.
do the fire agencies participate in these trials as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We have partners from different fire agencies. In Australia, we're actually doing our testing
Mhm.
with the Rural Fire Service of New South Wales. So they are our testing partner. Many of our judges come from different fire agencies from across the United States and around the world. And so from the get-go, that was really an ethos that we set forward, which was to really make sure that this was done hand in hand with our fire agencies.
You've mentioned decoy fires. I'm just curious how the trials will incorporate decoy fires. You mentioned barbecues. Are you going to have people set up doing small fires to lure the competition's attention elsewhere?
Yeah, so I can't say too much because testing hasn't happened.
Okay, can't give away the
But
secret. I got
right,
it.
I can't
But
give away the secret sauce. But yes, and the teams do know that they will have decoys and they will need to be able to ensure that their technology ignores those decoys. So, it can be anything from, something, depending on how they've trained their system, it could be something where it's, just something flapping in the wind that tends to be like the color of fire all the way down to like barbecues or pile burns, different things that would confuse the technology.
and that could happen any day of the year. Yeah, really interesting. One of the most compelling things about the competition is the breadth of sources of ideas and the shape of the different ideas. What is that diversity, which included even a high school team from Valley Christian
Mhm.
High School in San Jose? Tell us about where wildfire innovation will actually come from.
At XPRIZE, we believe that ideas can come from anyone, anywhere. And I think that XPRIZE Wildfire really does do a great job of demonstrating what that would look like. We had teams from over 55 different countries that started the competition. We currently have 6 different countries represented through our finals testing teams and the whole landscape from, yes, Valley Christian, a high school team, through universities, through startups, all the way to, major industry. And so it really does span the whole spectrum. And I think that that is, one of the huge benefits of X Prize is that it shines a light on a problem and it brings individuals and companies from so many different perspectives to the table to be able to address the problem. Something that I really love about our competition is that for a lot of our teams, this is both a company, but also a passion. Wildfires happen in so many places, and so many of the teams have been personally impacted by wildfires, or have, the high school teams talked about it growing up in areas where wildfires are happening, in and around. They're very cognizant of the need to have these solutions. And so I think that this is a really special competition because it solves such an important problem that impacts so many people. 1 in 6 Americans live in an area of wildfire risk, and 25% of Californians.
It's a very tangible problem for so many of us, particularly in the West. But the smoke from these fires in Canada is now familiar on the East Coast. It's
Yeah,
changed the very shape
absolutely.
of life. This is a great place to take a quick commercial break, folks. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Sustainability in Your Ear. Let's return to my discussion with Andrea Santi. She is Program Director of XPRIZE Wildfire, and this is a competition that's headed into its final year with 2 groups of finalists who are vying to win shares of an $11 million prize to help commercialize their technologies. Andrea, the autonomous competition requires teams to detect and suppress a high-risk wildfire in a 1,000 square mile kilometer area, size of San Antonio, as you said a few minutes ago, and do it within 10 minutes while ignoring the decoy fires. That's 4 times faster than current best practices.
It
Have
is.
any of the
Yeah.
teams met that benchmark yet in the trials?
So, as I mentioned, our five teams that are advanced to finals all were able to demonstrate that they have these end-to-end solutions to be able to autonomously detect, respond, like navigate and suppress a fire. Um, our semifinal testing was at a much smaller scale, and so while there were teams that did it in less than 10 minutes, this next finals competition is at a very large scale. And so it is going to, it's challenging. Every X Prize is very audacious. We really want to push the limits,
Mhm.
but we're very confident that we're going to have a team that can do it. Still to be seen, but that is what finals is for.
Absolutely. And it's great that we're testing these in such diverse settings. I mean, it seems like that Australia and Alaska are very different. Is that actually the case, or are wildfire conditions globally roughly the same?
They're very different. While you in Alaska, it's going to be wildfire season. And so
Mhm.
we are testing in an area that is much lower risk. The vegetation is going to be different. The geography is different. The fuels are different. So the plants and trees. In Australia, they'll have just been coming out of summer. And
Mhm.
so this is going into their fall, which means that, we don't actually know when we will test specifically, which specific days, because it is going to depend on the ability of the Rural Fire Service, RFS, to be able to do these are prescribed burns, but they have to do it when it's safe. And so we have a 2 week testing window, and within that window, we're planning to have 5 days of testing, and there
Okay.
will be 20-ish fires of varying sizes that the teams are going to need to identify, but different conditions, different, vegetation, many different
Mhm.
components.
Let's talk a little about the space-based prize. Lockheed Martin is also adding $1 million for the teams that can demonstrate the fastest and most accurate, precise detection. I'm curious, we talked a little about suppression already, but is detection turning out to be the harder technical problem than suppression, or is it the transition from detection to action? That coordination we were talking about earlier, what's the big unlock here?
Yeah, so Lockheed Martin is supporting the autonomous wildfire response track, which we endearingly call Track B. So the autonomous wildfire response track is where the teams have to detect it, navigate, and suppress it with, all the teams are using
Mhm.
drones. There's a lot of different detection technology, from, like I said, sensors that can, detect the particulates up to cameras, and then sensors and cameras that are on drones. The ability to have that detection, we're already seeing currently from, other companies that are doing different types of detection. So
Mhm.
this is looking at how do we scale it, but being able to get that detection into these autonomous response systems is really kind of the step change. To be able to have something that is communicating without human intervention, to have drones that can reach these fly under these conditions, like we talked about the
Mhm.
wind, to be able to navigate. They have to be able to get to the place. They have to confirm that there's a fire.
Mhm.
And then they have to suppress it accurately. And the teams will be testing on a moving fire. And so what that means is this is not a bucket with, or a barrel with fire in it. It is actually going to be a fire that is going to be, still small in scale, but it's going to be
Right.
moving and it will be dynamic. And so that is really challenging. And it requires quite a bit of training of their systems and having the system be able to respond and hit the target. During semifinals, that was one of the harder challenges, was for the systems to be able to go and really be accurate.
As you talk about it, it sounds to me like it's that transition from detection to addressing the fire appropriately. What's the right suppression mechanism? Is that something that you're going to continue to work on?
So the teams are definitely still, um, working on their systems. They have until June to be able to have
Mm-hmm.
all of their systems working. But yeah, I mean, it requires a lot of different components.
It's and obviously that's part of the bigger challenge that we have, which is to coordinate the technological responses we have to changing climate and to particular acute situations like fire. I'm curious as you observe the environment with these systems, are we also potentially identifying opportunities for prescribed burns in order to reduce fire risk?
I mean, absolutely. While our competition is looking at, detection and response, and our scenario is, an incipient stage wildfire, I do think that this technology will be able to be utilized in a lot of different scenarios, including prescribed burns, to be able to, especially if you have a large burn, to be able to monitor those areas to,
Hmm.
ensure that there's nothing escapes. So I think that, 100% that could be a use case is on prescribed burns. And anything that's going to reduce our risk. And I also, personally think that that could provide, maybe that peace of mind if you have
Hmm.
something on hand that's able to be able to, prevent something from spreading, especially if the fire conditions, weather conditions change unexpectedly.
Indigenous communities have managed fire for millennia using these kinds of burning practices we're talking about. Have you engaged with tribal fire practitioners, and do you see, or do they see autonomous technology as complementary to, or their traditional fire stewardship program?
So we have some. I just was at a meeting and was able to meet with a representative from an Indigenous community up in Canada, and they are actually testing. They're going to be pilot testing one of the team's technologies, and so
Oh.
it was really exciting to be able to talk with them, learn more about, how they envision it being used. They're looking, one of the teams, they have a heavy lift drone. And so they wanted to really be able to, understand how can this work
Hmm.
within their community, which is quite remote.
As I think about this kind of swarm of drones approach to fire management or fire detection, does the regulatory landscape need to change? For instance, do FAA regulations, which recently were involved in the shoot down of a border security drone, for instance, do we need to change the way we think about airspace management and the regulations that cover it?
That's an excellent question. And, the current regulations and even just current protocol, you wouldn't have drones in airspace with, a manned aircraft.
Hmm.
And so as the technology gets better, there's definitely ways that this can happen. And there are pilots and there's testing that's already occurred, not with us, but with other partners, looking at how to have that shared airspace. For some of these, especially the heavy lift, and being able to go, into higher airspace, there's there will be different opportunities beyond visual line of sight. There's many areas where the testing is ahead of where the regulations are.
What has your conservation career taught you about how technology deployment can shape how we change the way we approach our relationship with nature?
I got into this position in part because a lot of the projects I was working on with World Wildlife Fund,
Mhm.
specifically, were being lost to wildfire. Um, and I felt that it was kind of, we hadn't really understood the impact of wildfires for conservation. Wildfires are now the main driver of deforestation, so it's
Mhm.
overtaken agriculture. And in places like the Amazon, Congo, parts of tropical East Asia,
Mhm.
there's such important biodiversity. And I think that if we are able to utilize technology to be able to monitor these areas, ensure that we are understanding A, where fires are happening, and being able to look at what type of technology can be deployed. My hope is that we're able to save really, really important places. There's endemic species that only live in very, very small areas, and one fire could wipe out an entire species. So I'm very hopeful. And I guess the other thing I would add is that I worked for a long time on projects where your goal was really, like 20 to 50 years away. And being
Yeah.
able to work with XPRIZE, where in 3 years we have seen an absolute transformation in both what the technology can do, but in how the technology can help us address a really, really serious global problem. I think that we need more of these types of competitions. We need more of this technology to be applied to problems like conservation and really figuring out where there's some of these intersections. And it's great. I'm really hopeful because at this one meeting I was just at, there were a lot of conversations around areas of very high biodiversity and places, that we want to make sure that we save and understanding and bringing together the communities.
That's great to hear. After your 3 years with XPRIZE Wildfire, do you feel like we can turn back the rising incidence of wildfire and all the costs that we're seeing pile up when cities burn?
I think so. I think that the community and just citizens around the world are understand the problem in a deeper way.
Hmm.
And I think that this is going to be all hands on deck. You need the citizens, you need the homeowners who are making sure that they have, their zone zero. To no vegetation around their homes. You need communities. You need to have incentives from the city and state and other industry. I think that looking at prescribed fire and how we manage our forests and ensuring that we have more good fire on the landscape, and again, those policies that allow it and communities that encourage it. All of these factors together are going to be what helps get us to a new reality and a new paradigm.
You mentioned raising awareness of this. This competition actually sounds like really good TV. Have you thought about how to tell this story of wildfire innovation so that people can get engaged with and behind this kind of activity?
So we have discussed at lengths how we would be able to document some of the testing and for the autonomous wildfire response, but it is a very big, vast area. And so turning it into good TV is probably a step beyond us. But I think that the teams have amazing stories to tell. I do know that we're going to capture a lot of imagery to be able to share that story out. And we've been talking about it throughout the years. And we hope that we're playing a part in being able to raise awareness.
Hmm.
We have a resource page that provides a lot of different information to homeowners, to individuals about other, really amazing organizations that are doing great work in the wildfire space.
So, how can our listeners follow along as you complete the project?
Yeah, we would love to have them follow along. So they can follow our website, xprize.org /wildfire is the easiest way. We have lots of information about the competition and the teams. We have lookbooks to learn about which teams are competing. Social media, we put a lot of information out. You can subscribe to our newsletter. And then we will be hopefully sharing out quite a bit of good information during these testing events. They're in fairly remote locations
Mhm.
or kind of like closed systems. So we wish we could invite everybody there, but we will definitely be exploring how we can make sure that as many people as possible can get their eyes on what we're doing.
Well, Andrea, thank you very much for spending time with us today. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And, we hope that all your listeners really think deeply about wildfire, what they can do. And our goal is that, collectively we can all work together to try to reduce this wildfire risk and keep good fire on the landscape.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome back to Sustainability in Your Ear. You've been listening to my conversation with Andrea Santi. She is Program Director of XPRIZE Wildfire, an $11 million global competition now in its final year. Learn more and follow the finalists at xprize.org/competitions/wildfire. Once again, that's xprize.org/competitions/wildfire. This conversation revealed, at least for me, that the solutions to wildfire are arriving, but perhaps faster than the systems built to receive them can accept and use them. We'll need more public funding to deploy these technologies, and right now we're moving in the wrong direction as wildfire damage grows. Total federal wildfire spending is holding roughly flat at around $7 billion a year. However, the Trump administration's fiscal 2026 budget proposes eliminating the Forest Service's state fire capacity grants, cutting vegetation and watershed management programs by 30%, and zeroing out the $300 million in forest research funding that was in the budget before. So we're maintaining the suppression budget while cutting the prevention, detection, and research infrastructure that could reduce what we have to suppress. Fortunately, we have XPRIZE Wildfire to step in to take some of the burden, but it's not enough. Consider what Andrea said about early detection. Every wildfire does start small. If autonomous systems can get suppressant on a fire quickly enough, it might not even need to be fully extinguished, just deterred enough that firefighters can arrive to finish the job. The technology to do that end-to-end and autonomously is already being demonstrated in the field. But Andrea was equally direct about what's lagging, the testing ahead of where the regulations are. Consider autonomous drones operating beyond visual line of sight from the users and coordinating with manned aircraft during active fire emergencies. In order for that to work, the Federal Aviation Administration's frameworks for widespread use of drones in a variety of work needs to be reinvented. And that's evidenced, for instance, by the recent closure of El Paso International Airport over the use of counter-drone laser testing nearby. We are truly unprepared for the innovations that are coming. So in short, the engineering has arrived, but institutions need support to integrate that engineering into their operations. And a similar gap is evident in who's doing the innovating. Teams from over 55 countries entered this competition, and a high school team from San Jose made the finals by solving the problem of locating fires beyond ridge lines using multi-sensor triangulation, not because they had institutional backing, but because they had access to a well-defined problem and the drive to solve it, as well as the incentive of the XPRIZE's $11 million award. The XPRIZE's premise that ideas can come from anyone, anywhere, it turns out, are literally true. But recognizing that changes nothing if the regulatory, procurement, and deployment systems still favor incumbents and slow-moving approval processes. And underlying all these challenges is what Andrea brought to the work from nearly 2 decades at the World Wildlife Fund. Wildfires are now the leading driver of deforestation globally, having surpassed agriculture. The game has changed, but policy is still anchored in now outdated 20th century strategies. One fire in the wrong place can drive a species to extinction, or it can burn a city to the ground. And so Andrea said she's hopeful, not because the problem is easy, but because in 3 years she's watched a transformation in what technology can do and how people understand what technology is for. And that hope is well earned. But it will only translate into outcomes if institutions move at the speed the crisis demands. Citizens, homeowners, communities, industries, and policy, all of it moving together. And the competition does create urgency. Only the systems around it can act on and use the innovations that are delivered. So stay tuned for more conversations with people actually making sustainability happen. And I hope you'll check out our archive of more than 540 episodes. There's something worth sharing with anyone you know. Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us because, folks, you are the amplifiers that spread ideas to create less waste. Please tell your friends, your family, your coworkers, and the people you meet on the street that they can find Sustainability in Your Ear on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or wherever they get their podcast goodness. Thank you for your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.